Hi, I'm Barbara Burton, and I'm going to talk again about my Magic Bus University project, or I guess fictionalized project, in terms of the barriers. This is vlog number 6 for EPS 415, and I'm in the Red Velvet, or Red 3 group. As I looked at it, there are significant barriers that could be identified that would impede the implementation of the MBU project. One of the most obvious would be funding. The two potential resources that were proposed, the U.S. Department of State or U.S. government and U.S. higher education, are not, have their own financial issues. From the federal government's perspective, this kind of initiative would likely be a product of a pro-international government regime, somewhat unlike the current one. It would require collaboration between U.S. Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Education. In addition, there would need to be some kind of, and this sounds crazy that it would be hard to do, but a memorandum of understanding to facilitate this collaboration and the funding by the agencies and by the U.S. university community. These instruments exist, like RASA and PASA. They're reciprocating agency agreements, participating agency agreements between U.S. government agencies. But they always require a lot of negotiating and haggling before anybody signs on the dotted line. I've seen this. I've stood there as the paper shuffler, basically, like Vanna White, behind the Secretary of Agriculture and the head of U.S. land grants and the head of the state universities program to sign a memorandum with much pomp and circumstance after much negotiation. So basically, and I was just there to pass papers back and forth and as they signed it up. So sometimes these are quite difficult to achieve. So this may be a major barrier. Higher education is more likely to engage through an MOU structure, a memorandum of understanding, which is another negotiated product. Developing the terms and agreements to partner on such a large project can be a major barrier, and the devil is always in the details. However, there have been many examples where the parties have sustained successful partnerships, such as the U.S. land grant and extension system between the land grants and the USDA. It is possible, it's just not easy. Further, while one of the project priorities would be outreach to the U.S. university community, it would probably be limited to outreach, to the students by the U.S. university communities. It would probably be limited to urban areas where you find the U.S. Education Today, U.S. Education Centers, Education USA Centers. This would be a limiting factor in the outreach. There are certainly prospective international students that can be found in the countryside, and taking that or that don't live near urban areas. The journey to take the van or the program out to the country would not be without challenges, although perhaps the Magic Bus full of technology could make a few road trips to help accommodate this. But there are practical issues that could be a problem here, such as electrical facilities, road conditions, and location, coupled with the human issues of rural student education needs, and these would all need to be considered in the planning if you're going to go and take it down the road, or on the road, as they say. Unfortunately, even if it were possible to make it available to every international student who dreams of studying in the U.S., the reality is that there are still have and have not barriers, and not all would be able to realize this dream. Family and finances and fate often take priority over dreams, especially when considering the cost of an education in the United States. This is nothing to be gained from having a student to be all dressed up with no place to go. This represents an ethical dilemma, which in raising expectations without having any practical ways to address the expectation. Now, if the ultimate goal is to bring international students to the U.S. to study, the stakeholders would need to address this major barrier to these students, their ability to afford college. And in the past, there's been a program called the Participant Training Program that addressed this problem by combining the resources of the host country and basically the Department of State or USA Agency for International Development and they funded international student scholarships to study in the United States. So if there was a commitment to bring students to the United States to study, it would need to be sustained by that type of longer and larger, more generous funding package. The original design and development of the system for MBU would require highly trained and skilled teams of engineers, designers, artists, video game designers, and more. In particular, the skill set of the video game designer might be the most useful. As previously mentioned, this is a new major at Bradley University, and the field is becoming very popular. You kind of replace that as the old, everybody wanted to be an astronaut or a nurse or so on. Now kids want to be video game designers. Despite this uptick in the apparent interest, I think that there's still probably not enough to say that there's a lot out there that we can hire one right off the street very easily. So the barrier might include having this needed expertise available, being able to afford to pay for the expertise needed, and the various kinds of expertise needed. So if there's enough resources, basically, if bringing all these resources together, perhaps funding would not be an issue as long as we can find those right people with the right set of skills. The fact that the U.S. government is involved could also be considered a barrier by itself. As the government's foreign policy agenda changes, so do the programs and attention of the U.S. government, things that they engage in overseas. U.S. international programs have been sort of treated like dog treats to reward or sanction countries, depending on their behavior. And it might be that a country is on the naughty list and that would lose their Education USA Center. I keep saying that. Education USA Center, and the MBU would go with it. Further, prospective international students who might like to study in the U.S. but would not trust the U.S. government might be hesitant to engage in anything associated with it. Or maybe they don't approve of anything American, and that's increasing these days. These attitudes do not make them popular scholarship candidates either, so looking at, like a participant training program, that's an issue as well. But in terms of investment in the future of the U.S., these might be the very students we should be targeting to bring here and impress with our lifestyle and our friendliness and what a wonderful place this is, and so on. With this thought in mind, there are barriers associated with the U.S. government involvement in countries especially where criticism is not well tolerated of the government, such as Russia or China. And if you've been there in daily life, you'll notice that people are often guarded in their conversations about politics, government leadership, and so on. So they're going to have maybe a bit more of a hesitancy about engaging with technology that might collect their personal information. And in fact, in the center at Moscow, one of the staff members mentioned to me that students had commented about the fact that a lot of data was being collected as they applied to U.S. universities using the computers in that center, and what happened to this data. So this level of suspicion exists. Now, with the magic bus scenario, even more so than the Education USA centers, you would have a more intense set of information about the student. They would be spending more time. So this would make it even more in-depth, make more in-depth information available about the student. So the potential for more types of information being available for maybe misuse is there. And this data could be accessed without the knowledge of any staff at the center or any staff at the Magic Bus University as well. So this could be a problem or a barrier. One of the more difficult parts of these ethical questions is that this type of surveillance could easily be taking place right now, and in all likelihood is taking place without the knowledge of many of the support staff in the MBU or in the centers. Employees who think they are serving for the greater good and think they're helping may be unwittingly helping government surveillance efforts. Perhaps this is an accepted hazard of the job, but as I said, center staff in Moscow did discuss this risk briefly. As a barrier to the program, this ethical concern could be a problem if it leads to difficulties in hiring quality employees and especially technical staff. People may not want to work where their productivity might be used in ways that they did not intend. Since employees would probably be employees of the U.S. government, now that could be very good, you get a good pension and all that, but also the risk must be acknowledged that this might be something that might be done with the data. Obviously, some of them might also be on the inside and know about this, and perhaps they're fine with it. I seem like I'm focusing on all of this sort of secret espionage stuff, but it might seem a minor concern, but this very issue has been a source of major debate in the American Anthropological Association for the infamous Camelot Project, in which the U.S. government hired anthropologists to conduct research in Chile about 1964 in order to determine what might foment revolution among the rural people. This and some other things that they've asked anthropologists to do has made it so that in the ethical code of anthropologists it is not appropriate to work for governments in collecting data that might harm people. And so that's kind of one of the hallmarks of the code of ethics of anthropologists is the data that you collect should not be used to harm the people you collected it from. So this could be another ethical concern that might be a barrier to anybody thinking about doing this. Other barriers to the implementation include problems as the students engage with the technology. I think it would be overwhelming myself. Virtual reality seems a little on the almost nauseating side, frankly. But there could be overload problems that are sometimes associated with a VR format. It could be overwhelming to the point of disorientation and vertigo. And students who do this may not ever complete the program. So the prevalence of many people, young people especially, who are very familiar with video gaming and all this, may mean that they're very used to this kind of experience as well. The Education USA centers as follow-up sites may not be well equipped to handle the technology. They're often in older buildings. The electricity may not be great. They might not have a lot of space. So this could be just a practical issue that is a problem they'll have to deal with. So maintenance of the technology and troubleshooting on a daily basis could be a problem as well. Hopefully there'll be a helpline available so that the center staff do not have the responsibility of trying to do the troubleshooting. Finding those exact technicians who would take on the responsibility and be that teacher role might be a barrier. This is kind of like a roadie job without the concert or the parties, frankly. They would have this technical, and I mean by roadie, I mean the ones that have to put up the equipment. So they would have the responsibility to bring the van with the equipment around, travel for most of the year, and probably living in conditions that are maybe not the best, moving around and having to travel most of the time. So you have to have somebody who likes this kind of thing and is willing to put up with this kind of lifestyle. When you talk about work-life balance, this could be a trickier one and may not keep people in this job for very long because of the rigors of the position. One other issue would be parking. The Magic Bus University van or mobile VR facility would have to find a place to park it. This could actually present quite a problem. Seems really mundane, but those are the little things that will get you. The Education USA centers are located in cities. Like most cities, they're notoriously crowded, have traffic, and little parking. So they would have to probably investigate in advance in preparation for the van where you could park it. And this may not be a barrier that gets in the way, but it's one you have to think about when you're bringing this vehicle in. The associated problem is keeping the Magic Bus van secure when parked. As I looked at the place, thinking about the place in Moscow, the van would contain very expensive and, of course, desirable equipment and would be a sitting duck for thieves if it was left unattended. The centers may not be in the most affluent neighborhoods, and this one wasn't, and thinking about parking in Moscow, it required a lot of negotiation to get to park where the center was. So security or a guard might be needed, and that could be a barrier. But you want to make sure that all 4 tires are there in the morning and everything else. It's the little things that will get you, and no parking could be one of those. Thank you.